So I'm here today to talk about the power of play. This training is being offered on behalf of the Kentucky Autism Training Center in conjunction with Aetna. And I'm excited today to be able to offer this information to you, mental health professionals in the field working with children on the autism spectrum. When we think about the power of play, my objectives over the next 45 minutes or so are to help you learn a little bit about the social emotional needs of young children with autism, to learn 3 new ways to engage children with autism and their families through play, and to learn some of the resources for evidence-based practices to use with children on the autism spectrum and their families, should you want to learn more. I think it is important to remember, I like this quote a lot, because it's important to remember that it is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize and accept and celebrate those differences. As we look at the ways that diversity is shared within our communities, we think about neurodiversity. To me, is really one of the more exciting spaces for us to continue to start looking forward in the diversity spectrum. We think about we talk a little bit about ways to support LGBTQ families and racial diversity and ethnic diversity, and neurodiversity is really one of those things that I think we're just now starting to kind of get in on the front of it, but to really look at neurodiversity and the ways that it shows up in our playrooms and the ways that it shows up in our offices, and the excitement that celebrating and accepting those differences can impact our children and families that we serve. So the first thing that I want us to really look at today is the social emotional needs of young children with autism and what those specific needs are. We think about the social emotional needs. I would say that the individual needs of children with autism are not that different than the social emotional needs of most of the children that we serve. Understanding that communication being one of the big ones, that our children with autism often may have some difficulties with communication, that we want to be looking at verbal communication, nonverbal communication, all of our executive functioning skills. We really want to be participating in figuring out how are the receptive language skills of this child versus the expressive language skills. What are the differences in the ways that this child communicates? And we all have a need to communicate with those around us. But really, when we're thinking about the social emotional needs as they show up in our offices, is what is the way in which that child best communicates to those around them, what their needs and wants are. And if communication is one of those things that they're coming to our office for, are we wanting to expand that communication? Are we wanting to make it more functional? Are we wanting to make sure that we utilize more expressive or verbal language if the child has some verbal language, but also that we help parents to recognize that their child is desperately wanting to communicate with them, that we all need to be understood or to be able to communicate our needs and wants effectively. And that can sometimes be something that impacts working with children with autism and their families, is that those communication needs may be broader in those children. They may not use verbal language quite the same way that other individuals do. And so we want to make sure that when working with those families, we identify that as a social emotional need. The need for self-regulation. So when we think about being able to co-regulate with a helpful adult, right? So often I feel like my role when I am working with children and families is to also help to co-regulate the parent. That my job might be to provide co-regulation to that child and to that parent, and to learn new ways to regulate within the boundaries of relationships. And what we really know about our polyvagal system when we think about upregulating and downregulating is that any of those types of things can be more helped in community, right? So we regulate within relationship with others, right? We are very, very social beings. And so helping people learn to be able to co-regulate along with a helpful adult. And our kids with autism sometimes struggle with this self-regulation. They may struggle with accepting co-regulation from another helpful adult. And so social emotional needs for those kids might include helping them to learn to accept co-regulation from a helpful play partner. Play is the third social emotional need. And this list also, I feel the need to say, is not by any means an exhaustive list of the social emotional needs, but are definitely some of the main social emotional needs of individuals with autism and their caregivers. So we think about play. We want to make sure that we're identifying the interests, the preferences. Sometimes, one of the things I hear a lot from individuals when they're thinking about what is going on with this child is they'll say, well, they don't really want to play with friends, or they don't really want friends, and say everybody wants friends, right? Everybody wants to feel connected to other people. But sometimes our kids on the autism spectrum struggle to figure out how to play within relationship, right? They lack the strategies to participate and interact with their same age peers or with peer groups. And so they may need supports in the area of play and interaction with others in order to be able to navigate that. We want it to be trauma informed, right? We want to make sure that we're identifying that when we look at the social emotional needs, that we as caregivers and clinicians for individuals are trauma informed. All kids can experience trauma, even if they don't verbalize that, or definitely individuals on the autism spectrum can experience trauma. And so as a mental health practitioner who is supporting children with autism and their families, being trauma informed about the ways in which trauma might show up with those individuals, about the ways that they might express having had a traumatic experience, and that we don't discount those traumatic experiences, that we take that into account when we're working with children and families. Social navigation is the fifth social emotional need that we want to talk about. So individuals have a desire to be within peer groups, to make friends, to understand how to make and keep friends. And that sometimes is a difficulty with our children with autism, is the understanding of social navigation. How do I move into a social situation? And what are the skills that I need? Sometimes older kids that I have on my caseload with autism will tell me that they feel like there's just like a missing piece to the puzzle, that they feel like there are some social understandings that most kids understand that they don't get. And so they're trying to figure out, how do I navigate those social situations? And maybe what are those kind of unwritten rules of social behavior that I need to learn? So no social navigation. And then a sixth social emotional need is self-advocacy, right? So the understanding that nothing happens without me, or that's about me, nothing happens without me. So a self-understanding, to be able to identify my feelings, to navigate positive senses of self, right? To learn to advocate for their needs and wants, and how to make those statements so that they get heard and understood. And that goes back kind of all the way around in a circle to communication, right? Making sure that they know how to communicate those needs and wants effectively, and that they know how to share their feelings and their thoughts with individuals. So when I think about the social emotional needs of kids, these six are the ones that really come up when in relation to children with autism and their families. And we want to make sure that our treatment models, are things that we are doing with kids, help them to meet these social emotional needs. The second thing that I want us to really look at in the power of play is some real specific ways to engage with young children and their families. I am the early childhood mental health specialist at Seven County Services. I also have a private practice here in Louisville, Kentucky, working with children and families. And while these games that we're going to talk about say for young children, they're not necessarily only for young children, but there might be games that you come up with for the children you're working with, if your kids are a little bit older, that you might find to be helpful in engaging children and families. So there are three main kind of areas that I like to have a conversation about, the types of games that we might play, the types of playful interactions. And this really goes back to looking at those social emotional skills that we're trying to build. So we're going to have social skills games is going to be one of the first ones. And so with social skills games, we are looking at some of those things that really build those socialization skills that we're wanting to connect with, or that we're wanting for kids to be able to connect with. And we're looking at some of these types of games. I'm going to take a second and let you really look through this list, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what each one of those is. So Ready, Set, Go is any game where we are playing just that, ready, set, go, right? Or I'm like, ready, set, go. Right? Anything where there's anticipation, anything where they're waiting on a command from another individual, right? Where this game is being played together. And sometimes I might be the one that says ready, set, go. And sometimes I might let the kid be the one that says ready, set, go, right? Sometimes I might be waiting and participating, and sometimes I might have them do it. I love to play these games in family groups also, so that each person gets to take some turns in being the one that gets to have sort of that power, right? This goes into like another social skills game that I think of is Duck Duck Goose. It would be a ready set game. I mean, a ready set go game, right? So like I'm waiting for that word with the anticipation of hearing some of that. So that would be one of the ways that we might do it. Back and forth ball toss, just anything where I'm going back and forth. If I can get the caregiver involved and we can go around in a circle, that sounds great. The goal in that kind of a game is not necessarily that we are all really good at catching, right? So it also might be that we want to make sure that the ball is sized enough that we can go back and forth with each other. And that we can actually have, that it becomes less about whether or not I'm have a really good ability to catch, but that I'm really just going back and forth. I'm having to make some eye contact with you. I'm having to engage with you back and forth. I'm having to make sure you're paying attention before I throw the ball at you. I might need to get your attention by calling your name, but that back and forth goes into that. Social skills games are really about sort of those joint attention and bids for social connection with that. Where did it go might be a game where I hide things, right? Where did it go? Or I playfully obstruct the item that I'm holding on to. So I turn it around, I hide it behind my back, I hide it underneath the table, or I hide it in there. I have a lot of kids that really love sort of that idea of where did it go, right? To be playfully obstructing the thing that they're interested in. These games are also games you can play regardless of how verbal this kid is, right? So even if, we are not necessarily waiting, I'm not waiting for them to have a specific word on that, but I might be using my words. Where did it go? What do we think? Where's the ball? And letting that kid engage into that social connection. Seek and find is almost anything that you might hide. In my office, we often hide these little worms that are made out of pipe cleaners, and kids are able to do that because they're all different colors. And so it also kind of becomes like a focusing and attention type of a game. But you can do seek and find with a seek and find book. You can do seek and find with something in the office. You can play I Spy with something where you're looking around and you're getting the idea of kind of what it is that you might be able to see. And these might depend on how verbal or what the skills are of the child that's in your office. Complete the story goes into kind of almost like a comic strip, some ideas of like, this happened and this happened and this happened. What do you think would happen next? I can do that with a comic strip that I draw out. I can do that with a story where I stop the story halfway through while we're reading it and we talk about what we think might happen next. What's the next possibility of what might come up in that? Any of those kinds of things where we are completing the idea of the story. And it can be a fictional story, or it can be a true life story of something that's happened with that kid. Playful obstruction is a little bit like where did it go? It goes into figuring out kind of making sure that I'm obstructing the thing that that child really loves, right? So if this kid really loves engaging in play with those stacking donut circles, right? So, I mean, what are the things I can do? I'm going to playfully obstruct your ability to get to that, right? I'm gonna keep them in here, or I'm going to do it so that you learn that you have to engage with me as the helpful adult in order to be able to get to that preferred item or that preferred task. A tickle fight's actually kind of what this lady's doing in the picture up here, right? wait for it. Goes into wait for it, which is also right below it. Both of those things are anticipation games, going back to ready, set, go. Anything where I'm anticipating what the next move is, and I somehow need to interact with a helpful adult in order to get the thing that is fun, right? The tickle fight or the next step, the what's gonna happen next. I used to play wait for it with cars, right? So a kid would love a car and everybody would wait for it to get the car to roll, right? Just sort of an exciting anticipation, but to where they're really interacting socially with me or with their caregiver. Tour guide is a kid gets to give a tour of a area. Doesn't have to be an area that they know. They could give a tour of an outside area. They could give me a tour of their house if we're on telehealth. They could give a tour of the office if they've been there maybe and the caregiver has not been there, so that they can show around sort of like, where are the certain things? Where's your favorite thing? That might be a thing you might ask on a tour guide. Have the kid point out the favorite thing in the office. Have the kid point out the last thing they played with. Have the kid point out where certain items are on the shelf or where certain things are in that office. Excuse me. A scavenger hunt is where a child might go and find something. I want you to go find me something that's red. I want you to go find me something that's round. I want you to go find me something that makes you feel happy or represents something that makes you feel happy. I want you to go find any number of things, right? And I usually will go and find it as well, right? And if I'm doing a family session, I will have the caregiver go find it as well, so that we are all interacting. If it's something that makes you happy, then we are sharing back and forth, right? If we were playing this game in a group of kids, then I might let each of them share, right? So that we're practicing what it's like to both listen and to share information. And then really any turn-taking game, anything that goes back and forth can be a social skills game. The goal with social skills games is to build that self-confidence and social navigation, to build the playfulness. Those are both two of those social emotional skills, to build communication, right? It's going to hit several of those social emotional needs of children that we talked about right at the start. The next area of gameplays, we've got our social skills games, and then we have our emotional regulation games. When we look at emotional regulation games, these are anything that help me to co-regulate within myself, right? Now, these also might be things that I'm practicing as a clinician within that playfulness with a kid, right? So a feelings find it kind of goes into the scavenger hunt, but it really targets specifically feelings. I also have some feeling eggs that I hide around my office, and each one, when they find it, we talk about that feeling. What does it feel like to feel that feeling? Where do I feel it in my body? Where might they feel it in their body? Feelings find it, or it might just be that they show me a face for angrier or sad, or maybe they find it and they have to guess, right? What is that thing? Or they show me what the feeling is and I have to guess what that feeling is on that. Lego or color feelings, so build something that reminds you of being angry. Color a picture with colors that remind you of being angry. We might also draw feelings faces. And there, sometimes drawing a feelings face can help me understand what their impression of what that feeling looks like on the face of another individual. Angry/calm practicing, right? So I might practice, oh, tensing up my body like I'm angry. What does it feel like to have a calm noodle body, right? I'm going to practice those things. If I don't practice how to manage and navigate different feelings, then it's hard for me to do that in the moment, right? It's hard for me to emotionally regulate. Relaxation poses might be things like yoga poses. It might be laying calm on the floor. It might be hiding my head under a blanket. It might be hiding into a tight, small space. What are some of those, just any pose that works for kids? One of the things I like to do in my office is have them lay on the floor and allow the bubbles to fall on them. I might blow the bubbles over the child and just allow, what does that feel like to watch it? If I do that, I usually try to make sure the bubbles aren't going to fall on their head, because most kids, when having to lay on the floor with bubbles in front of their face, are going to like not love the idea of them going in their eyes, right? So maybe they're just watching some of that fall, or we might do scarves, right? If they have some sensory issues, it might just see what happens when the scarves fall down to do that. And then we might practice some different relaxation poses, buzzy bee, bunny breathing, pretzel breathing, any of those kinds of things. Musical instruments, so working really with fast and slow increments. So let's see if you can match my speed, and I'm gonna go really fast and then I'm gonna slow down the beat, right? We know that there is entrainment that happens when there is a beat external to our body, that our internal rhythm starts to regulate to that external rhythm. And so thinking about musical instruments and the ways in which we are fast and slow with that, right? We can speed up our heart rate with the fast things. We can slow down our heart rate with slow things. And then the kid can have some control over doing it. And I'm matching them, right? But ultimately that we're working through that regulation of upregulation and downregulation. Any sort of breathing practice, practicing different things. I find that every kid has different ones that they like. Some of my kids like to make up their own breathing strategies. And so they'll come in and they'll do T-Rex breathing, or they'll do wiggly worm breathing. Or I had a kid that did pill bug breathing one time, like roly-polies that roll all the way up and then stretch all the way back out. And that was something that felt really helpful to them. What I find is if we allow kids to utilize breathing things that are their own strategies, right, that go along with their own interests, especially for our kids on the autism spectrum, that those kids are more successful in using those strategies because they match a certain interest that they have. Social emotional songs, anything that allows kids to come up with social emotional categories or social emotional things that they can talk about. So songs about feelings, songs about going fast and slow, songs about making friends, right? There's a lot of those things out right now. David Kaiser has some great songs on social emotional learning, but really if we Google songs for social emotional learning, there's a lot of those out there for kids. And music is something that we know helps kids remember certain steps, right? If we can set it to music, but you can also make up your own social emotional learning songs, right? So you might set a song to a favorite tune that a kid has. If the kid likes the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, then your song might be about cleaning up their room, or about making a new friend, set to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Getting your wiggles out, right? So being able to wiggle, to dance, anything with music and dancing around, those types of things can be really good emotional regulation games, right? So we can start out with faster songs, move to slower songs, or dependent on what we need. If a kid comes in and is already vibrating at a really high frequency in our session, comes in and is already really, really wiggly and handsy, then I might want to be doing something that helps us to downregulate that body. But I can't just say, calm down. I have to sort of meet you where your energy is and then slowly walk you back to that slower energy, because that works for us, right? But I have to match you and then help to pull you into regulation with me. Bubbles is a great emotional regulation game. It often will switch the focus of a session. If a kid is distressed, it sometimes will help us to improve the motivation of the kids, right? Like bubbles are great transitional objects as you walk out of offices. Body part bubble pop, to be able to pop different things with your elbows or your nose or your chin or your knees. Any of those things with bubbles can be super helpful. And then movement, fast and slow. So when we think about movement, right, anything where we are doing different kinds of movements with our body, fast movements, slow movements, medium movements. What is it like to move like a turtle? What is it like to move like a roadrunner? What is it like to move like a T-Rex? What is it like to move like a mouse? Different kinds of movement things can be emotional regulation games. So we've got our social skills games, we've got our emotional regulation games, and the last area for games is connection games, things that really offer or increase connections. So as a therapist, what we're working on really is both increasing connections with me as the therapist, but also increasing connections between children and caregivers. When I'm working with caregivers, I want to make sure that they know the kinds of things that they can do to build connections. Lots of times when parents come into my office, they do want behaviors to change, but what they really want is they want to feel more connected to their kid. They want to feel like they have a tighter bond with their kid, right? And what we sort of know about connection is that I am more likely, if I feel connected to you, and I have those connections, then I am more likely to be able to do the things that you ask me to do, right? When we're in relationships, when our relationships work. So hats, dress up, masks, putting different hats on each other, any of those kinds of things can be connection games, right? Puppet talking back and forth. I have a lot of kids that really love puppets. They're more likely to tell the puppet something than they are to tell me. Even though it's very clear that the puppet is right here on my hand, they're still more likely to talk to me than they are to talk to that puppet than they are to talk directly to me. So puppet talking can be great. Parents and caregivers, you could have them take a puppet in the car with them, right? Or any kind of that back and forth. And I want these parents and caregivers in my sessions playing games with children, because ultimately I also want the kid to learn to connect to the caregiver. Drawing my feelings, so being able to draw feelings faces, draw their own feelings, draw where they feel it in their body. Any of that can be a really good connection game. And if I can get the parents and caregivers involved in that, then they also sometimes identify what they feel. And maybe it's the same, but maybe it's different than what the kid feels, and that gains understanding. The more we can gain an understanding of each other, the better connected we feel. Mirror play, so having a big mirror where kids and parents can be making funny faces together and looking at each other, or even on a mirror, right? You draw your partner with a dry erase marker. So I, as the parent, might draw the kid, and the kid might draw me in that mirror, and then we step back and look at the artwork that we've drawn. Hand jam and other hand-related games. I like to make a list sometimes with caregivers of different kinds of hand-related games. But when I think about a hand jam, right, these are sort of those traditional things that kids used to play on the schoolyard, where they had different hand movements and words and rhymes that went along with them. But it also could be a hand stack, right? Where I'm stacking my hands up and you're stacking your hand until I can see you underneath that hand stack. And then let's see if we can bring it back down again too. Okay, well, maybe we can do that here. Now we can see each other on the top. And also anything I can do with my hands, secret handshakes, high fives, thumb wars is a great one. Breathing stuff about Johnny, 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 whoops, Johnny, whoops, Johnny, Johnny, whoops, 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 down, right? Anything that I can do with my hands. But also something like maybe even putting lotion on each other, right? The parent being able to put lotion on the kid and the kid being able to put lotion on the parent. That's a hand interactive game. Child-directed play, so in your play sessions with kids, doing a lot of child-directed talk where I am describing what's going on, I'm identifying what I'm seeing, I'm noticing the play the child does. Not only does this keep me present and engaged in the session, but it makes sure the kid knows that I'm present and engaged in the session. And that's ultimately what I want the kids that show up in my office to know, is that they're important enough for me to be able to connect with them and to see what it is that they're showing me. Simon Says, or Tell Me What to Do, right? Simon Says might be, that's a traditional Simon Says game, so it's a following directions game. Tell Me What to Do is another following directions game, or it might be an obstacle course. So we might say, okay, we're going to jump like a bunny 6 times. Then we count 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. And the kid might give a direction. We're going to meow like a cat 3 times. Meow, meow, meow. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to pose. Tell me what kind of animal to act like, right? Tell me what to act out. I have a lot of kids that want to change me into things with a magic wand. And that's kind of a version of tell me what to do, right? Tell me how I'm supposed to act now and what you did. Rolling the ball back and forth can be a connection game. Keepy uppy with a balloon is a connection game. Tossing the balloon back and forth can be a connection game. going on a nature walk together, connection games, right? Any of those things where we are working together cooperatively. Cooperative games are a great way to do that. I feel like I can turn almost any game into a cooperative game, but there are specifically some games out there that are meant to be cooperative games. Things like Race to the Treasure, or trying to think of a couple of other ones that are there, but think where we all, basically the goal is we as a collective group are trying to get something done before whatever the external thing is gets there first, right? So any of those cooperative games. However, we can make anything into a cooperative game. How could we turn Candyland into a cooperative game? How could I turn Go Fish into a cooperative game? That the goal is for us to make all of the cards into pairs, right? So any of those things that I could do where we are both trying together to work together to beat the system. Legos can turn into a cooperative game if we do a thing where it's like, I have all the Legos, kid wants to build the Legos, parent has the instructions, right? Parent tells me what to look for, I look for it and hand it to the kid builds it. Right now we've got a cooperative game in a set of Legos, and we've turned that into something where we're all working together for the same accomplished task. So those are your three main types of games: social skills games, emotional regulation games, connection games that we want kids to participate in our offices, that we can help to meet those social emotional needs of children that we talked about earlier. The last thing I want us to really look at, the third thing, is play-based, evidence-based strategies or practices to use with children. These are some specific evidence-based models that are out there for play therapy with children on the autism spectrum. The first one is floor time. This is developed by Stanley Greenspan. Floor time requires the therapist and parent to physically get down on the floor. So you want to make sure you're down there. First of all, get a comfy rug, right? Something that's fun to sit on. And the idea is that we're engaging for 2 to 5 hours a day, that with floor time, there are lots of child-led sessions. That does not mean 2 to 5 hours a day, every day in a row, right? Like 5 hours in a row. It can mean I'm sitting on the floor for 15 minutes here. I'm coming back for 20 minutes here. I'm coming back for 30 minutes here. But that these child-led sessions are focused on activities the kid enjoys, that I'm engaging with that child on their preferred strategies, and that we are going to see how we can expand that play. So I might playfully obstruct the things that they want to get to. I might find new ways to play with those toys or objects that they want. And that I'm helping that parent and that kid engage together. So these things have really been looked at as improving that parent-child relationship while increasing that kid's ability to engage in back and forth play, right? When we look at floor time and what its function really is, it also stands for, floor time is also called the DIR model, which stands for developmental. So I want to make sure that I'm hitting the developmental standards, that I'm meeting the kid where they're at developmentally. The I stands for individual differences, and so I'm utilizing the individual differences of that child to make sure that my play interactions are the most effective they can be, because that's what the kid's interested in. And then the R stands for relationships. So I'm making sure that I utilize that relationship with the kid to be able to increase communication, emotional thinking, and self-regulation. The second model that's out there that's an evidence-based model for working with children with autism is the PLAY project. PLAY stands for Play and Language for Autistic Youngsters. It is an intensive evidence-based developmental intervention that utilizes oftentimes an occupational therapist and a speech therapist and a developmental interventionist and a play therapist and a whole host of people that are working together with the family. It's based on floor time models, and it teaches parents effective and fun strategies to really increase their daily interactions, their positive interactions that they're having. It's looking at increasing intimacy and connection with another, two-way communication, complex language and communication skills, emotional thinking. And it is a great complement sometimes to more traditional ABA therapy. ABA therapy is often a traditional model that is prescribed for individuals with autism. And it really works to target changing behaviors that are struggles. But the play project really looks at improving communication and connected relationships. It was developed by Dr. Richard Solomon. And if you are looking for some more information, Autism, The Potential Within is a book by Richard Solomon that you could find to talk more about the play project. There are some things called integrated playgroups. That's an evidence-based practice for working with children and families with autism. So these might be social skills groups that are focused on collaborative play with both neurotypical children and neurodiverse children. And it usually is therapist-led with therapist-directed activities. An ideal integrated playgroup would have 2 kids with autism and 2 without autism, and that the idea is that kids meet 2 times a week over a 12-week period, providing them ways to interact and practice in the moment. Integrated playgroups are a great way for individuals to meet other individuals and to just really practice in a real-time setting. Some integrated playgroups also include parents that come alongside their children so that parents are also getting interaction with other adults who have children similar to theirs. Child-led play or child-directed play. Sometimes directed play can be a challenge with kids on the autism spectrum, especially before that relationship with the mental health practitioner can be built. And so child-directed play or child-led play, originally developed by Gary Landreth or kind of spearheaded by Gary Landreth, helps to really captivate kids' interest and pay attention to what kids are interested in and really follow their lead in the play. So this type of play really looks at helping kids build social communication. It builds that understanding that the caregiver or the therapist is paying attention to what's going on with the kid. And it really, as a therapist, involves utilizing acknowledgement, tracking, facilitated responses, helping respond and reflect to what the kid is saying, but keeping it in the child's realm without questions, criticism, or comments that make sort of any value judgment on the child's play. So it's really just paying attention. In this picture that's here on the slide, if I was the therapist, I might be saying, "Oh, you are looking at the green block. That green block is a triangle, and you had a red block in your hand, but it's starting to tip over. You're very curious about what's going on," right? Any of those kinds of things. So I'm tracking the play and I'm tracking what a child is doing. And the last evidence-based model I want to make sure that we review is Aut Play. That is a specialized play therapy approach that's been developed by Robert Jason Grant for to meet the unique needs and interventions with autistic children. Actually, a lot of the games are his ideas of social skills games and emotional regulation games and connection games that we have been talking about is sort of his 3-pronged approach to working with neurodivergent children and adolescents and other kids with developmental disabilities. It really looks specifically at how do we increase those relationships that people have in order to improve the symptomology that we might be seeing. More information for OttPlay can be found at ottplaytherapy.com, and there are often lots of trainings that Robert Jason Grant does around the country, sometimes on Zoom, sometimes in person, if OttPlay is a model that you might be interested in learning more about. One of the things that I think is really important as a mental health practitioner is to know where the resources are to learn more about these different models. So these are all of the different websites for Floor Time and the Play Project and integrated play groups and Aut Play Therapy and some of the places that you can go to learn more information about these various models, especially if you are interested in becoming a practitioner of one of these specific models yourself. That's all that I have for today with our Power for Play in the Playroom. My hope is that you have learned something that you can utilize in your practice and that you at least know some places where you can go to get more information if you're interested in learning more about any of the models that I talked about or any of the games that I talked about. And hopefully that while I was talking, you also found or came up with some of your own things that fall into social skills and emotional regulation and connection. Ultimately, I believe these families with individuals on the autism spectrum really want somebody to be a partner in this, in the work with them, right? They want somebody to jump in the boat with them and to be able to say, I may not know all of the answers right this second, but I'm willing to jump in the boat and we can play together and work together to improve these social emotional skills. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching this webinar. Please take a moment to complete the electronic evaluation by scanning the QR code or typing the URL in your web browser.